Hello everyone, welcome back. Here we are with Chapter 6, the first part, where we will talk about adverbials. Chapter 6 is where things really start to get interesting. We start to get into some of the nuance of sentence diagramming, so hold on to your hats. I thought it would be helpful to begin with a brief review of things we already know about adverbials, things that can modify the verb. So let's begin there. Things we already know can modify the verb. Adverbs! Shocking, exactly no one. Adverbs can function adverbially. They modify the verb. This is what they do. It doesn't matter where the adverb appears in the sentence. It can go just about anywhere, including right smack dab in the middle of a verb string. So for example, I have suddenly become hungry. Notice it comes in between the auxiliary and the main verb there. Adverbs can have qualifiers. For example, I have quite suddenly become hungry. Adverbs do not have to end in ly, as we know, as long as they are answering verby questions. Adverbs like now, then, today, often, always, sometimes, here, there. These adverbs are answering questions like when, where, how, why. We are very comfortable diagramming these adverbs underneath the verb. We are great at it, and we are not freaked out by it at all. Let's talk about another thing we already know how to diagram when it's modifying the verb, prepositional phrases. Again, we have spent so much time talking about this since even Chapter 2. Prepositional phrases can function adverbially. We know the prepositional phrases have a preposition, duh, and then the object of the preposition. If the prepositional phrase is answering a verby question, it goes under the verb. Prepositional phrases can also be modified by qualifiers. For example, the bulldog napped shortly before noon. Shortly is modifying the prepositional phrase and would be diagrammed as a modifier of that component of the sentence. Lots of sentences have more than one adverbial prepositional phrase. We know this. And we also know that no matter where they come in the sentence, these adverbial prepositional phrases are diagrammed underneath the verb. We are so cool with all of this. It's good that we are so cool with all of this stuff because now we're going to move on to things we didn't know could modify the verb. Hold on to your hats. Noun phrases. Woo! This is pretty dramatic. Noun phrases and nouns can function adverbially. This mostly only happens when they're talking about time, place, manner, or quantity. Noun phrases that do things in a verby way, talking about time, place, manner, or quantity. So ask yourself, which question does each noun phrase answer here? We walked home. Where we walked. I'm leaving Monday morning. This is when we walked. When we're leaving, excuse me. I'm going your way. Again, this is where. Every day he studied 2 hours. This is when, every day, and for how long? 2 hours. I travel a great deal. How often? We are flying tourist class. This is, think about those manner adverbs. This is in what manner are we flying? Tourist class. I sent the package airmail. How did I send the package? The Boy Scouts hiked single file down the trail. How? Again. And he arrived this evening. That's when. So all of these noun phrases are in fact functioning as adverbials. Let's talk about the missing preposition and how this is going to help us understand these diagrams. If we think of these adverbial noun phrases as just prepositional phrases where the preposition has gone missing, we will be in great shape. Look at this example of the pattern 6 sentence, we walked home. We walked up there in the bulk of the diagram, and home underneath the verb, like an adverbial. Nothing is on the diagonal line. Normally that's where our preposition would go. We walked, toward home is the preposition that's missing there. Now, this diagram illustrates a crucial question, actually, because there can be a little bit of confusion when we're dealing with noun phrases that function adverbially in terms of what pattern are we doing. Is it pattern 6 or is it pattern 7? A sentence like, I arrived home, might immediately look like a pattern 7. It's a verb, like arrived, and it's followed by a noun that could be the direct object. There are a couple of clues here, though, that let us know that it's in fact an intransitive verb with a noun phrase functioning adverbially. One great test is to see if you can make the sentence into passive voice. You will recall that intransitive verbs, by definition, can't be turned into passive voice because they don't have direct objects. So let's take the sample sentence, Butch ate a bone. I can easily transform this into a bone was eaten by Butch, since eat is a transitive verb. How about I arrived home? Can we make it passive voice? If we tried, we'd get home was arrived by me. It doesn't quite work. So clearly this is a pattern 6 sentence with an adverbial noun phrase. Another great thing to ask yourself is, hey, does the noun phrase answer a question? So let's think about two competing sentences. The first is Cassidy is flying the plane. And the second is Cassidy is flying first class. How are they different? Well, in the second case, Cassidy is flying first class. It's telling us how she's flying, right? In what manner she's flying. In this case, it's luxury, right? It's answering a verby question of how or in what manner. I suppose that Cassidy is flying the plane. I suppose you could say that it's answering the question of what is she flying. But clearly, the plane is the direct object, right? It's the thing that's being flown, right? If anything, it's a nouny question. The plane is being flown by Cassidy. We can turn it into passive voice. It is not answering a verby question. That's pattern 7, whereas Cassidy is flying first class. That's got to be pattern 6. Let's move on to another thing that we didn't know could modify the verb. Verb phrases themselves. Verb phrases. Hot diggity! Verb phrases can, in fact, modify verbs. This happens most frequently when we're dealing with the infinitive form, and we've got this thing that your book very delightfully calls the sign of the infinitive. I just love that, the sign of the infinitive. And that's to, of course, which is added to the base form of the verb. For example, Butch dropped the toy to give Cassidy a turn. You'll notice we have give as our verb in the verb phrase and to at the sign of the infinitive. Zach took the afternoon off to help wash the cars. Brad Pitt worked out for 3 hours each morning to prepare for the demanding role. You'll notice that all 3 of these infinitive phrases are actually answering the same verby question, why? Why did Butch drop the toy? To give Cassidy a turn. And you'll notice that these infinitive phrases, as their name suggests, are actually phrases. To give Cassidy a turn, to help wash the cars, to prepare for the demanding role. They have complements, they have modifiers, they have all of that fancy stuff. And since this is the case, yes, you were hoping it was true, and of course it is, we are going to have to think about their patterns. Let's start with a fairly simple sentence that has an infinitive phrase embedded within it. Susie drove the scooter to deliver the wedding cake. Okay? We have 2 phrases here that we can think about diagramming. The first is fairly straightforward. Susie drove the scooter. We're pretty familiar with this. And it would look like this if we diagrammed it pattern 7. So far, so good. What about Susie delivered the wedding cake? Well, if we diagrammed that separately, it would look like this. You'll notice that both of these diagrams have the same subject, Susie and Susie. That's going to be important because when we add this adverbial on to our main verb, we are going to keep the same subject of Susie. Susie drove the scooter to deliver the wedding cake. Susie is also the subject of the infinitive phrase. And both of these are pattern 7. You may have already noticed one pitfall that you might run into with these infinitive phrases, and that is that the word to, which we know and love, actually has another function that we're very familiar with. To has 2 functions. To could be the sign of the infinitive, but of course it could also be the preposition to. It's just 2 different functions for the same word. So you've got to check to see what follows the to. Do we have a verb following the to? Or do we have a noun following the to, like the object of the preposition? Fortunately for all of us, our good friend Buzz Lightyear is going to help us solve this problem now and forever. Buzz, of course, is famous for saying to infinity and beyond. This is very, very, very close to what we're going to use to figure out if we're dealing with an infinitive phrase or a prepositional phrase. To infinitive and beyond. Okay, 3 easy steps. First, find the word to. Second, look beyond the word to. Look beyond it. If you have a verb there, well, that means you have an infinitive. If you don't have a verb there, then it is a prepositional phrase. And then be careful to go ahead and look beyond the infinitive as well, to infinitive and beyond. Make sure you get any modifiers of the infinitive and stick them in there in the infinitive phrase. Let's practice just a little bit telling the difference between an infinitive phrase and a prepositional phrase. Here is a sentence. We walked to the beach to find treasure. You'll notice we have two twos in there. We got to figure out which one is which is the sign of the infinitive, which is the preposition. We walked to the beach. You will notice that the beach is very, 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 very clearly a noun phrase, right? And we would diagram it just like this. We walked where? To the beach, right? Pattern 6. Pattern 6. We're feeling good. We're feeling sassy. We're feeling fine. Then we walked to the beach to find treasure. Look beyond the two and see what's there. In the case of to find treasure, we have a verb. We have an infinitive. We would diagram it like this. To find treasure. You'll notice the infinitive phrase has a couple of funky things going on with it. We have a subject for the infinitive phrase that's all the way over on the main line. We, right? We found treasure. Okay. And it has a pattern of its own. Ask yourself, what pattern is it? Well, if it has a subject, we, and then find treasure, of course, it's pattern 7 also. So we have a pattern 6 sentence in our main clause and a pattern 7 sentence in our infinitive phrase. Let's talk about the in order to test. This test is another great way to make sure that the infinitive phrase is modifying the verb, not the noun. We're going to talk more about when verb phrases, like infinitive phrases, modify nouns instead of modify verbs, when they function adjectively instead. This is prepping us for that moment. So if you can insert the phrase in order to in front of your infinitive to answer the verby question of why, then you are dealing with an adverbial infinitive phrase. So, for example, we walked to the beach in order to find treasure. In order to, which is a 3-word phrasal preposition, would go all on one line. But if you can stick in order to in front, then you know you are dealing with an adverbial infinitive phrase instead of an adjectival infinitive phrase. More on that coming up soon. Oh, Butch no find treasure. Butch has a sad. Surprise! Butch isn't sad because he didn't find treasure. His face just looks like that. But he does treasure the opportunity to tell you to keep working hard on these sentence patterns, and soon you will have adverbials down pat. See you soon.